statistics on this, Bill. Levitated by the human touch.
Here's the pass. Antonio's through. Chance of 4. What a goal! What a brilliant strike by Antonio!
Hello and welcome to another edition, the last edition of 2021 for the Knees Up Mother Brown podcast. I am joined today by my two little pigs in blankets. It's Jack Elderton and Callum Goodall. I told you it was going to be awful, didn't I? I said it was going to be awful. How are we doing, gentlemen? Are we recovered from that yet?
Recovering. I'll be there in a sec.
Made an absolute Christmas meal out of that one. We are this week. That was worse. That was worse than the first joke. This week we are looking at Spurs in the Cup. We've got the horror show of Southampton and the redemption of Watford, as well as a bit of a year in review, a little bit of a preview ahead, and some transfer talk as ever. As I always do, if you'd like to get in touch, correspondence can be sent to many of them. We've got the email address, podcast@kumb.com. It's also the forum thread at newsupmotherBrown@kumb.com, and then the Twitter, which is kumb.com, all words. You can also comment on the YouTube videos. I've only just learned that that's a thing, but I wouldn't want to respond to anyone on there. I'm far too arrogant, and even get in touch personally. Even a friend of mine who was listening from Hong Kong, who's a Newcastle fan, gave me some feedback over Christmas, and thank you, Chris, for listening. I'm sure that was a very bizarre experience for you and for me to find out. Gentlemen, we're past Christmas. We shouldn't dwell on that because who likes happiness? We should instead look at two defeats and a win. So it feels like a century ago, but we're about a week ago now, aren't we? From Spurs, just over a week from Spurs. It's a long time in football with all these cancellations and the never-ending Christmas period fixtures. But it was a really interesting game, Jack. It was not quite what we wanted, but certainly interesting to watch. A good game, one we played well in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of the funny things that comes out of watching football from a more analytical perspective and doing the podcast and having to write things up and stuff, is that I strangely came away from the game feeling more positive than I did negative, given the fact that we just lost to Spurs in the quarterfinal of the League Cup. But the strength of the performance and our ability to employ multiple systems with a back three, as well as the flexibility we've shown with a four as well, was really positive. And there were some really positive individual performances as well. So there's some really good things to take out of the game.
Yes, I say exactly the same, Cal. It's an odd one when you're watching that game, and you're very frustrating at the end when you can't seem to break through. But we were good, and we deserved more.
Yeah, 100%. I thought we played really well. It's always going to be gutting when you don't get the result against arguably your fiercest rival, and particularly when you return home to the town that your mum lives in, which is full of Spurs fans. I actually arrived back home on the day of the match, so it was painful. But yeah, no, definitely some heartening stuff to see. And like Jack said, the sort of fluidity throughout the game to be able to switch it up at various intervals and actually perform pretty well in all the shapes really. Bodes well. But yeah, just disappointment was the main takeaway, but we shouldn't be too disheartened, I don't think.
No, it must be weird for Spurs to win their cup final in a League Cup quarter-final, but there we are. I'm sure they'll make a DVD of it soon. There was, for all the positive was talked about, Jack, and you kind of started with a happy tone there. There was the goals we conceded, kind of sloppy and annoying more than anything, actually, I'd say.
Yeah, well, both really disappointing. I think everyone by now knows that listens to this podcast that low cutbacks are our kryptonite, and certainly my kryptonite as well, because they drive me insane. And it's another two of them here. And yeah, just really, I mean, the first one is particularly awful. The second one less bad, less marked mistakes, but both come from really shoddy defending. And in a way, that's obviously a negative, that you've got people combining and making a series of errors at the back. But also from a structural perspective, in some senses, it's quite nice that Spurs' two big chances came from a series of errors, because actually the structure limited them so much they didn't really create much outside of people making stupid mistakes. So if you put your first teamers into that setup, I think you see a completely different result.
But it's easier to cut out those kind of individual mistakes than have to fix a whole system. I guess, is a point. But we've spent a while talking about a player. We wanted more. There was enthusiasm for a player to be brought in. Callum, I'm going more to you than to Jack on this one. Issa Diop. If I unnecessarily attacked Jack's support of Benrahma for no reason earlier in the year, I'm making you at that point the leader of the fan club for Issa Diop, and it's been a chastening period to be that man, I guess. And that first goal was, well, it was a hallmark of the problems of Issa Diop, I guess.
Yeah, he's been dropping stinkers left, right, and centre for a while now, and that was really the cherry on the icing on the cake. And yeah, it was just painful, and it's almost so predictable as well, because it is, like you say, it's just all the things you know that Diop does, but you kind of, at the start of each time when you see him on the team sheet, you're like, he'll be better today. He'll be better today, definitely. And he still does the same stupid mistakes, but just charging off that back line, it's a hallmark of his game that just doesn't seem to be able to be ironed out, unfortunately. And I think I'm going to have to jump down off my throne of defending Diop and kind of cede that he is probably not the player that we all hoped he would become.
I'm guessing that you look at someone like that, and I would guess why it's even more frustrating for Moyes, Jack, is if you're making these very disciplined setups, you've got in Diop is someone who is, I mean, ill-disciplined, but it probably is the best word. He can't, he makes decisions to do defending that he doesn't have to do, and he quite often fails to do it to the detriment of the others around him as well. And that goal was that illustrated, really.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite clearly infected by the spirit of Yannick Bolasie, and and that's really not what you want in a centre half, and particularly not one that's partnered with Craig Dawson, because in Craig Dawson you've got a turret that you move around the pitch that is very good at doing what he does, and when you put someone alongside him who's disciplined and allows him to focus on his best strengths and will cover behind him to compensate for his lack of pace, then you have a partnership that can work. If you've got someone who's charging out of defence and consistently exposing massive spaces, then you also turn Craig Dawson into a really poor defender, the defender that Watford were really happy to get rid of. So I think the issues with Diop are twofold. You've got him making terrible decisions, sometimes that he's able to rectify by being a very, very strong physical presence, by having those spidery long legs that we know he can get into side challenges that it looks like he's not going to make, but when he doesn't rectify them, he's not got a defensive partner alongside him that can compensate for that lack of that chaos really that he creates. And so on the one hand, you never want a centre back that creates chaos regardless of the partner, but secondly, when you've got a player as limited as Craig Dawson, please don't put someone next to him who consistently exposes all of the limitations of his game.
The other area to move on this, and I know you've had some lovely conversations with the best people of Twitter about, but it's one of the people you can blame on that is being picked as a blame. Maybe lesser of the three is Rice, who hasn't followed the run, and there's Lanzini. And talking about Lanzini is going to be a thread through this podcast for the next 3 games. I mean, how much of the blame goes to them as well for not? Should they? I mean, one of them should be picking it up. I assume. In my mind, it was Lanzini.
Well, I think both on both goals are at fault. On the first goal, they let Højbjerg go far too easily. I think it's just completely unacceptable from the pair of them. I think there's lack of communication. There's probably a bit of a lack of a partnership there in terms of defending that deep, and two of them being combined in that position. So I don't know whether they each think the other one's going to go, but or whether it is just as poor as they stand there and watch Højbjerg go, and neither of them are quick enough mentally to respond to that and to see the danger. Usually you'd expect Rice to be the kind of player who can spot dangerous situations like that and anticipate them even and be there to stop them from happening. But in this case, Højbjerg's got a free run straight through the middle of the midfield and into the box, which is incredibly disappointing. Again, though, you kind of have to counterbalance this with none of it happens if Diop isn't making stupid decisions in the middle of the defense, and people aren't having to be switched. When we were really struggling under Pellegrini, you create a situation where everyone has to be switched on at all times because you can't trust what anyone around you is going to do. And you see the same thing when Diop comes back into the side, and I think, if you're Rice and you're used to playing, or even Lanzini, I mean, anyone, and you're used to playing with a kind of stable and consistent defense behind you, you're perhaps a little bit less switched on to these things because you can trust people behind you. And you see that exposed here, and still they've got to do better. And then on the second one, Lanzini gets dribbled, which is just, you can't do that inside your own box. Just silly. If you're not the kind of player who's going to win that ball, then don't go for the challenge. Just screen them from being able to get at the defense. And then Rice should be dropping just very, very simple principles of midfield. If someone goes in for a tackle, drop yourself 2 yards so you can cover in case they get beaten. And so yeah, both of them poor on both goals.
We can move on from the misery of the goals, I suppose, and I'll move on to something tactical, which is kind of interesting and gives us a chance to lift our spirits a little bit. The box midfield, and this is a great chance for me to then go to someone else you've been championing in a second for you to talk about, Cal. The box midfield work was an interesting and kind of new approach in that game for us, Jack.
Yeah.
It's something you can explain better for those of us like me who wouldn't use the term box midfield very often.
Well, so usually when we play a back three, and when we have done under Moyes, we play a 3-4-3, which transitions very easily into a 5-4-1. So you've got a very simple low block shape that you retreat into, and then a kind of very attacking in the wide spaces 3-4-3 that overloads wide areas and allows you to get crosses into the box. A box midfield or a 3-4-2-1, something I think we've seen Chelsea use quite a lot, where basically your two defensive midfielders and your two wingers in your 3-4-3 move around the pitch as a square. Particularly when you're defending, it's very, very obvious to see them all moving in this kind of box shape. And what it allows you to do is it seeds space in wide zones. But for example, against Spurs, who have I wouldn't say they're massively reliant, but they're quite heavily reliant on their two central distributors from deep zones. So Højbjerg and Skip both drop and assist the centre back. So I don't think they've got much progressive ability in that defence at the moment, particularly not from the wide defenders. I don't think Ben Davies or Davinson Sanchez are remarkable at playing the ball forwards. So they have these two defensive midfielders who drop and take the ball off of them and then progress the ball forwards from there. Both of them have got very impressive ability at making long diagonals, particularly Højbjerg. I've seen a lot picking out Reguilón, who gets high on the left hand side. And the box midfield allows you basically for your wingers to, instead of dropping off and protecting the wide space and helping the wing backs, it allows them to press onto the distributors and to try and force your opposition to speed the game up more. And that's what happened. I mean, in the first 20-25 minutes of the game, I'm not sure exactly when the goals happened, but in the first 20 minutes of the game, it wasn't a very exciting match. And I think our system was doing a very good job of stopping them from doing what they do well, and their system was doing a very good job of stopping us from doing what we do well. Once the goals happen, you kind of see the chaos that us playing a box midfield can bring. So the game massively sped up as a result of it. So it meant that we ceded quite a lot of chances, but also it meant that we got the absolute best you could possibly get out of players like Vlasic and Lanzini, because you have them operating in central wide spaces, in the half spaces, being able to get on the ball and turn in really threatening areas, and allows Bowen to not have to marshal that central space entirely on his own without people being close to him. So in terms of the setup from a personnel perspective, from who we had available for the game, the 3-4-2-1 was a really, really exciting and sensible system to use to exploit the talents of players we had available in forward spaces. And then switching to a 3-4-3, which is something we're much more comfortable with in the second half, was also very, very sensible. The amount of chaos that the 3-4-2-1 had brought about in the first half had led to a lot of chances, but the amount we were conceding obviously isn't stable, especially when you've got someone like Diop at the back making the decisions he's making. So switching to a 3-4-3 and a false nine playing in the middle of the pitch and allowing Bowen to go back out to playing wide, and Fornals came on and played for a long stretch of the second half as that false nine player. I mean, we had over stretches of the game with over 90% of possession away against Spurs, where they had admittedly also a kind of A/B team, but much more I'd say a much stronger team than the team we were playing. To be able to get that much control against them, I know we lacked something in the final third, and what my argument would certainly be that was a lack of quality from the wing backs, because we created so much space for them with that system in the second half. There were so many good crossing opportunities, so many good opportunities for combination play out wide that were not taken really by either wing back, but the use of the two systems was very, very, very good.
Vlasic in that one, and we've all been waiting, and I know Cal maybe more than us as well, having kind of followed it with the numbers as well. It was almost we had the little brief glimpse of Burnley where he looked good, had those key passes, made the big chance. That felt more like his breakout performance, I guess, Cal.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's no surprise that we've seen that happen with him playing in more of a central role. I think we've said previously when we've seen him, and we've seen people complaining that he's not worth the money we've paid for him, or every time he comes on he looks wasted, and it's because he's been asked to come on and play out wide, which is just not where he flourishes. And you give him the chance to kind of run things in the middle of the park and surround him with support, and he knocks a great performance out of the park. Just some of the numbers, I think. So he ended the game with 100% pass completion, which, I mean, that's pretty banging when you're playing in that area of the pitch. What else have I got? Sorry, I must admit, since Jack mentioned Yannick Bolasie and Issa Diop, I can't stop thinking about Issa Diop on Lord of the Mics now. If he appeared, I just can't stop thinking about it. So Jammer, on the off chance Jammer listens to this podcast, please get Diop in the basement.
I think that's an off chance. I think there's an off chance. Yeah. I think that's a big off if we're looking at off chances.
Yeah. Anyway, so as I was saying, 100% pass completion, brilliant. 100% of passes into the final third and boxes were completed as well, which is great. 3 shot assists, brilliant. 2 recoveries as well in the opposition half, which I think is really good, and something we've kind of picked up on before is that one thing he hasn't lacked in showing, despite perhaps not being able to create as much as people hope, is that his energy and his commitment to chasing lost causes and stuff. He's done that consistently, and he was getting his rewards in that game across all areas, which was great to see. And as well, drawing fouls, he does that in a lot of games, but it seems recently he seems to have done it a lot more, which I think is important for a team that has proven to be quite effective from set piece situations, and B, in situations where previously we might have just lost possession because someone might have failed to get it under control. Or I'm thinking of when in recent games we've kicked it up long, or persisted to kick it up long to Antonio, whose touch has essentially let him down, and then we just lose the ball. Doing it to Vlasic, he's managing to get it under control, and despite facing away from the opposition goal, he's turned it into a threatening situation because he's made the defender commit and then won the ball, and then we can all move further up the pitch and get possession in a more advanced position.
He uses his body so well, doesn't he, Cal?
That's it. Yeah. He leans into the ball really well and invites pressure, but does it effectively. It would be you see it happen a lot where players invite pressure, but almost too blatantly, and they don't get the foul because the ref sees exactly what they're doing and goes, "No, come on, you bought that. I'm not giving that." Whereas Vlasic, it's so fluid and it's all in one motion that it looks. And a lot of them are fouls, but he definitely knows what he's doing. It's not just that he's being wiped out. And that, I think, is really positive. And it's sort of small things like that can go unnoticed, I think, but are really important, particularly in games where you might be up against it and you kind of just need a break in the play to sort of re-establish your shape and advance up the pitch and have a bit more control. So, I was really pleased. I hope it's a sign of things to come, and I hope that we see him operate more in a central location on the pitch, because clearly it's where he flourishes. And I think with Ben Rama going off next, is he done that actually? Has he played his last game before AFCON? He's got one more.
I think he's got one more.
One more. We'll no doubt see more of him, I think, undoubtedly, and hopefully this is the sort of level of form that he can maintain.
Ward-Prowse flicks it in, header towards the back stick, and it's in! Saints have retaken the lead. Jan Bednarek gets the final touch.
It felt like a Masuaku who maybe wasn't at his peak, and he has had strong performances there, and a left side that wasn't quite functioning, seemed to be getting all the ball as well.
It was bizarre. To be fair to Masuaku, I actually thought he had a pretty decent game. So when I say I'm going to talk about the overemphasis on the left side, I think it's reasonable to assume, based on recent performances, that it's probably going to be targeted at Masuaku. But to be fair, of the two, him and Benrahma, it was actually Benrahma that was kind of nullifying the threat on that left side. Largely just dead crossing. I think 20% cross completion rate from about 6 crosses, I think it was, across the game, which obviously partly that comes down to the quality of Southampton's defending usually, or the quality of the attackers usually. But there was crosses that were blazing out over the byline before they'd even got to a head height. Like, it was ludicrous to watch. And it only became more annoying in the second half because I did a bit of a sneaky and went and got a nice seat close to the left flank, which meant I could watch it in ultra HD. It was not nice. But yeah, it was just annoying. I think the numbers, I think we had 23 attacks down the left and far less down the right. But on the flip side of that, it just wasn't working. But then Southampton had obviously realised that we were just not doing well down that side and were pressing us so hard. Masuaku lost the ball 7 times in the opposition half, and like the percentage of their attacks that went down our left flank was just incredibly high. I think 17 on the right compared to 5 on the left. So clearly they'd seen that it was a weakness of ours, but we just continued to persist, which fine if you don't have another option. But on the other flank, which seemed to be underutilized in that game, we had Bowen and Soufal who are clearly better. Well, Soufal's a better crosser in my opinion than Masuaku, and Bowen is just on fire at the minute. So why not try and run everything through him rather than through a Benrahma who on that day couldn't seem to get the ball in the box? It was just infuriating. I'm sure there was some reasoning for it. I'm sure the coaches were on the iPads and decided that this was the right thing, but from the fan point of view, it was just annoying me. And then we saw Bowen coming when he did get the ball down the right hand side. It was just so much more effective. And as much as we say they're our kryptonite, which they definitely are, a low cutback seems to be quite effective for us as well in the attack. And I'd like to see more of them, particularly from Bowen, because he has the ability to sort of, you almost wouldn't expect it to be a low cutback from someone who's left-footed playing on the right side because it's awkward body shape wise, but he kind of just has that ability to square up a parallel with the byline and just poke it in with his left foot or whip it in with his right foot, which is really dangerous.
So hopefully the last 2 games, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I was so incensed that we didn't. If we're going to overwork one side, why not the right side? Because everything that we try down there is working, whereas everything we tried down the left wasn't working.
It's interesting because I suppose the counterpoint, maybe we were funneled down there. We talk about a manager and a team that we've got 1 point from and haven't looked particularly good against in the 2 games this season. So you wonder whether has Hasenhuttl found a system, Jack, that has worked to negate the things we do well?
Sorry, I'm just stuck on the idea of Cal doing a sneaky, so very sort of
I'm more stuck on the idea of
tiptoes walking through the London Stadium.
Of getting to a stage where your own eyes means ultra HD.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really pixelated back then. No, you were just further away, mate. You were just this.
You know what I mean.
I very much do. The system at Southampton.
Yeah. So Hasenhuttl has changed his system from what Southampton usually play in both games against us, which is obviously very interesting because he clearly thinks he has a way of playing against us that is effective. And I would agree. I think the use of a 4-1-4-1, I was actually kind of worried prior to Watford because they've often used a 4-1-4-1 as well. But the use of a 4-1-4-1 where you can release your 2 central midfielders ahead of the 1. So you've got 4 defenders, a 6 who's your 1, and then 4 flat midfielders, and then 1 striker. So the 2 central midfielders, in this case, I think they were James Ward-Prowse and Mohamed El-Younisi. You have Romeo behind, and you can release Ward-Prowse and El-Younisi to go forward and press. And pretty much freely. I mean, if you watch Ward-Prowse's performance, the guy is chasing everything across the whole pitch. And El-Younisi, very similar. He's not quite as good at pressing, but they're interchanging. They're just chasing the ball. And effectively what that does to us, probably also important to add here that when you play that system, you have to have a defender like Salisu, and Salisu has been in just the most outstanding form against us in the 2 games. I mean, just absolute worldies from a centre back. 10 out of 10 performances in both games from him.
Yeah, I'll just chuck in quickly as well. Salisa's got the second highest pressure success rate in the Premier League this season with 42.7%.
There's
So
something about
he's
him,
just perfect.
It looks very much
ludicrously
like
good.
Diop wishes he was Salisu.
Yes.
I wish Diop was Salisa.
Yeah, we all wish. We're all with you, Issa. Well,
but yeah, so you've got him, jumping out of defence in the way that Diop wants to, but winning the ball. Just winning the ball consistently over and over and over again. So his aggression at the back, combined also with a striker who can start your press really aggressively in Brozier, and Ward-Prowse, who's just a magnificent presser, so much energy, and so good at closing things down quickly. El Unisi there doing the same thing, and effectively what that forces us to do is it negates a lot of our central progression. And that's what we can be very, very good at, where we can be very threatening. Is we've seen a lot this season, Rice carrying the ball through central spaces. And when you've got people harrying you at such speed in the middle of the pitch, it's very hard to carry through that. So often we're forced to go wide early. And frankly speaking, as much as I love them, the fullbacks at the club, other than Cresswell, don't really have the passing range to then get us beyond in a way that isn't simply just hitting the striker. And that's often what we've ended up doing against Southampton, which is funnel wide early, balls straight into the striker, and then you've got Salisu there who's just dominating. I mean, he dominated Antonio in the first game, he dominated Bowen. And Bowen actually did quite a good job. I mean, I think Bowen did very well under a huge amount of pressure, but he's so dominant over those balls that come in early into a striker. He just nips in front of you, or you get away with it because he's so timing it so well, but just throwing his body in at the right moment to throw you off balance, winning headers. So that combination for them is so effective at stopping us from getting the ball into their defensive third and then being able to camp them in there, because actually, if they do have a weakness, it's once they're camped in defensively. I don't think they're a very strong footballing side at all. I don't think their threat on the counter is as good without Brozier. I don't think Salisu's actually that impressive a defender once he's forced to defend inside his own box at all times. So yeah, very, very strong performances from them across both games, and a slight concern maybe in that there's a system that clearly works against us.
Another tactical thing you picked up on before was Kyle Walker-Peters playing at left back. I mean, it's probably not much of a choice for them. They've been hit by injuries, and the way he cut in. When we were watching the game, you mentioned, and it's interesting to mention things that Vlasic is strong at in terms of defending up the field, and things he's less strong at. And he wasn't following the run as well. And did he? I think you pointed out when we were talking about it that he didn't quite understand how to track Kyle Walker-Peters because he was cutting more inside and was doing the underlap.
I think so. Kyle Walker-Peters is a very similar thing to João Cancelo at Man City. He comes inside and adds an additional midfielder. And whether I blame Vlasic for this, I'm not entirely sure. But we clearly didn't know how to deal with this as a team. I don't know whether it's Nikola Vlasic not knowing how to deal with it, or whether we just didn't. It wasn't well coached. I mean, we didn't have much time to turn around for this game, but yeah, you've got Kyle Walker-Peters, for the third goal, again, it's a Kyle Walker-Peters free run into central midfield, and then Souček picks it up late, and there's a foul, and then the goal comes from that. But yeah, tracking those runs didn't work effectively throughout most of the game. And actually, often what ended up happening is you've got no protection for the right fullback, so Southampton in this case, because Vlasic was either drawn inside and therefore not able to cover, or was not following the run in the right way and therefore not covering the central space. So you've kind of got this awkward combination. And on Vlasic, we talked about how strong he is in central areas. Put him out wide and force him to be doing a different kind of defensive job. First game against Spurs, he's released to press high up the pitch. He's not so worried about things going beyond him because he's in that box midfield, so he can stay ahead of the defensive pivot. He doesn't have to come and add in to make himself a third player inside that, or a fourth in a 5-4-1. And then put him out wide, and he's got to do much more covering defensively. And the first goal, for me, I don't think many people have spoken about it, but first goal for me comes from Vlasic not following El Younousi. He's clearly the recovering player, and he has him, and Souček actually turns around from what he's doing and points at El Younousi and shouts at Vlasic cover, because he's going to have to go out wide, because actually Vlasic isn't there. Arguably Vlasic should be, so Souček can take the run of El Younousi, but because he's not, Souček has to cover, and Vlasic just carries on jogging. And he lets El Younousi attack that central space freely with no one around him. And then eventually it ends up looking poor from Rice. But actually, Rice has got far too much to focus on there, because Souček has gone across the cover. You need someone to be there to help you out. And Vlasic was available, but chose not to speed into that space.
It's an interesting, because that is going to be, I mean, undoubtedly David Moyes, that's the kind of thing he's definitely going to have paid attention to. And
that's why he got subbed at half time, isn't it?
Yeah. And he's all about these details and making sure these players learn to do these things before they're trusted. It's probably why Vlasic hasn't been introduced quickly enough yet, because he hasn't passed this test in the same way that Ben Rama didn't seem to have passed that test in his first few months. But if we go on that goal and we look at it there, I think I would agree with you that there's never a foul on Carl Walker-Peters for the third. And if it is, it's about 10, 20 yards further back. I still don't think it was a foul. I think it was almost, you are bigger than him, Thomas, and you have leaned towards him, therefore foul. But the second goal, Callum, on the balance of conversation, I've had to come back to you. It's a little bit unfortunate I didn't need to, but I've had a lot from Jack recently. It's I'm sorry to say again, it's Issa.
Yeah.
I mean, what's he doing?
I don't know. This for me is worse than the one against Spurs. I think it's just so dumb and just so unnecessary. Like, it's not even really that threatening in a position. Like, it happens so far up the pitch, and he's just decided to absolutely steam into it, completely catch himself out of position, and then has left Dawson a horrendous task of chasing down.
You give any blame to Dawson on that? I mean, I feel sorry for him more than anything.
Well, I give blame to him in the sense that it's him that committed the foul. Like, it is him that's done it, but he shouldn't have been put in that position in the first place, because Diop should never have committed like so aggressively to the initial. Well, it wasn't even a challenge, because he didn't get the challenge. So he's left Dawson with a ridiculous, like, just an impossibly difficult task. And yeah, I mean, it's resulted in the penalty and the goal. But yeah, Diop just a stupid, ill thought out decision, that once again trying to make defending out of a situation in which he probably didn't actually need to defend in. And if you're going to do it, like you said earlier, Chris, if you're going to do it, at least do the defending. Like, if you're going to make that decision, you have to get it right. And consistently he makes bad decisions and gets them wrong, which is just unforgivable, really.
That's the thing. At least when it was someone like, it's the kind of thing Collins might have forced a thing, but if he was going to go force it, he would make sure he just took the player out as well. Diop doesn't seem to have that killer instinct to go, if I've messed this up, I'm going to have to kill this man. That's not part of his defending.
No. See, this is this very, very good point, is that generally when you have defenders who make mistakes like these, James Collins is a perfect example. There is an understanding of, if I mess this up, I'm going to have to accept either a strong yellow card in the orange territory or a red card. And Collins did it all the time, and it drove everyone mad, because you almost once a game you'd have him flying out, and he'd either get it perfectly right and clout the ball out for a goal kick by kicking it so far, or he'd get sent off by just kicking someone. And Diop does neither. He doesn't get there, and then he doesn't do anything when he doesn't get there. You rarely ever see him making a foul in these situations. Yeah, and I said it earlier, but if you've got a centre back that's consistently asking Craig Dawson to run towards his own goal, then you are set up to fail. I'm sorry, you're going to concede 2 goals a game. It's just going to happen.
So there are positives from the game, and I think if we're looking at positives from the game before, because I'm going to have to stop the negatives, and that's me saying that. It's Antonio, quite a quick turnaround from the virus, and has come on and had a good impact from the bench, scored a goal. I would struggle to praise his movement for the goal, because he stands flatly still for the whole of it, but it's the kind of thing that strikers do and score. And it was a positive to see that he looked he looked that 10%, 20% better that may have come from having a bit of time off, Cal, even if that time off probably wasn't as comfortable as it could be, with the virus around.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've said in previous podcasts that he's just looks absolutely knackered, and I mean, obviously his time off was forced, but it has meant that in theory he's had an extended period of rest, albeit no one can know how the virus actually affected him. He could have been shattered as well, but it didn't look like he wasn't. It looked like he benefited from the rest. He was much more positive. His movement was a lot more positive. That's one thing we'd really picked up on the last couple of episodes, I think, saying that his pressing was bordering on non-existent, just probably because he was so tired, and his movement in the box was frustrating at best, probably. And it's quite ironic almost that the goal, like you said, he scores because he doesn't move, and no one could say whether that's a purposely made decision and whether he's read the situation and gone, actually, if I stand completely still, it's going to fall to me, which is what some of the best strikers do. Like, no movement is good movement because everyone else moves around them and then creates a space. But I think the reality is that Antonio probably just couldn't be asked, and it just happened to fall to him, which is fine because he still scored the goal. But we shouldn't over credit him. But yeah, I think like the goal, as fortunate as it might have been, the general performance across his time on the pitch was much improved. And perhaps, I don't know, I remember speaking to my old man after the game, could be indicative of a future role as he enters the latter stages of his time at West Ham and career. Is he not just like the perfect impact sub? You just bring on this absolute athlete who is pretty good in front of goal, and as he starts to get older and we have to manage his minutes, I can't really think of anyone I'd prefer to come on as striker for half an hour and just absolutely bully a defence.
At least realistically for West Ham.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the other positive, and that it links into and starts perfectly out in the Watford section as well, is Lanzini's performance, Jack. And he came on and changed the way we played, I think, from half time, and probably helped balance what you were talking about as a weakness we had, and has helped balance that in the Watford game as well.
Control, isn't it? It's tempo control. It's his anticipation of when to drop and assist his other midfielders. We talked about some failures of his in the Spurs game, but the performance against Southampton and the performance against Watford, for me, at the highest levels he's hit since the injury. He's performing remarkably well, and while he may not be having the final third impact that we are used to seeing from a David Moyes West Ham team, where the number 10 gets very close to the striker and scores goals, the transition into using a deeper kind of 10 that progresses the ball and getting the wingers closer to the striker looks a hell of a lot more threatening than anything we've done for a long time. Performing really, really well, progressing the ball as we know he can, helping out defensively when he needs to. A lot of that not really being, impressive tackling or anything like that, but just positioning himself in the right spaces to cut off options. So screening really. But then even, I've not praising his tackling, but then for the Watford goal, it's him speeding forward, winning a tackle, and then progressing the ball forwards and passing it into Antonio before it's cut back for Ben Rama. So he's performing very, very, very well, and allowing us to exert the kind of control over games that we saw against Spurs in the second half, that we saw against Southampton for periods of the second half, and that we saw against Watford for long periods of the first half.
We talk about midfield, Muzzle, as well. It was his presence in that Watford game, and just that chance where one of the, say, Soucek or Noble was on the ball and doing something forward, or Soucek, say, drifting forward for the goal. Have they got the confidence to play a riskier pass, do that drifting move, because he just cuts in and sits there in case of the counter, where before it was Soucek and Rice, and if one of them's gone, they are no man's land alone almost.
Yep. Precisely that. It's there's a much nicer fluid kind of balance to the three with Lanzini in there in terms of defensive protection. Something you definitely need when you're playing Noble in the Premier League at his age. It helps hugely. It helped hugely in that game. But the key thing I think we should talk about really is the overall balance and Noble, the role he performed and what Rice can do and what Souček is released to do as a result of the role Lanzini is playing, what it allows Ben Rama to do, the space it gives Bowen, all of these things are huge positives as a result of Lanzini's inclusion and what he can offer.
But the change that you expect that to carry on going forward, because it's basically getting more out of a front three than a front forward just by having someone to make a balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at me knowing things. It was a game, the Watford game, one to enjoy for many reasons. Obviously, a win. There was something quite special. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a goal celebrated in the same way as Mark Noble's goal, where there was just genuine joy. His smile as he went away. They all looked desperately happy for him. It's meant that he scored in another consecutive year in the Premier League calendar year. It was his last chance to score to keep the record going that he's got going. He tucked it away. But his performance was, other than maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes where he looked just slightly like he needed to get into the pace of the game, Cal, his performance otherwise was brilliant. Yeah,
really, really promising. And I'll be the first to hold my hands up that before the game started, I think I tweeted saying, "What the hell is Mark Noble doing starting a Premier League game?" Particularly when all signs pointed towards Krau being the perfect person to start because Rice is out, and you've got someone who's essentially a screener on the bench that isn't starting. And I was very frustrated because, I mean, I guess the point still stands. Why did we bring in Alex Krau? Clearly, it's not worked out. Whether that's just because Moyes doesn't rate him, but yeah, Noble was brilliant. And who would have thought that in 2021, a 34-year-old Mark Noble would have the majority of possession for a West Ham United team and play the full match? Yeah, it's just crazy. There was spells definitely where he looked way off it, some stray passing, but yeah, on the whole, it was really promising. And I think looking forward as well, the performance in general, I think me and Jack mentioned it a little bit before we started recording. Just on the note of that balance in midfield, if you just get Rice to come in and sort of superimpose him in the role that Noble played in that midfield against Watford, I think Noble in the game had 76% pass completion, and Rice is someone who consistently is averaging like above 90% pass completion. If you get him to do that exact thing, it allows Souček to flourish. It brings Lanzini into the side, but you also have an essentially like Noble on steroids. Like his defending is better than Noble, his passing is better than Noble, it's more dangerous than Noble, but it also brings the best out of the players around him, which is something we haven't necessarily seen this season.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted before the game about when the lineup came out, with Noble and Souček playing together in midfield. That's inevitably going to mean that Souček isn't going to be going forward, because there's no way Noble can hold counters on his own. Turns out he can, and if you put Rice into that team, then you've got someone who can hold counters infinitely better than Mark Noble can, someone who can pass the ball progressively infinitely better than Mark Noble can, someone who's going to be much more consistent in possession, much more consistently available. Well, actually, that's not true, because Noble is very good at presenting himself as an option all the time, but someone who's going to be as good at presenting themselves as an option. Yeah, and if Noble can do it, then you know, what can Rice do playing that kind of role?
It's certainly the ideal game for Mark Noble to play, because Watford, bar 5 minutes, they were abysmal. They didn't put any pressure on a player, really. They should have been trying to get runners. I mean, you could worry that Watford have played a similar system to Southampton before. Southampton would have made sure that Mark never had a second rest, whereas Watford arguably allowed Mark Noble to play the game at a pace he wanted to play. I will say that I think he's still slightly better at cute passes than Rice is, at those little things round a corner like he did for the goal, where he does it for Bowen to get in. It's just something he will try that sometimes Rice doesn't, but he is getting better at. Definitely. The other one, I suppose, is if you look at the balance of play, we talked about the balance being very much down the left, and where that was in the Southampton game, swung completely the other direction, Cal, in this game. It was, and to our benefit, as maybe the two of the three best players on the pitch, arguably the three best players, as Souček does drift more right than left, we're playing down that right side.
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly why in the previous game, I was calling for it because it's clearly our stronger side, and I just don't get why you wouldn't utilise it. And yeah, everything fell into place against Watford. And yes, there is a tax on the fact that Watford were absolutely atrocious across the park, but just play to your strengths. It's kind of rule 101, I guess. And yeah, it was great. It was great to see them doing well. I thought Southampton was brilliant, actually. His crossing into the box was great. It perhaps wasn't as accurate as we've seen, but that's, like I said previously, not entirely his fault. But yeah, it's nice to see him seeming to hit a run of form again. I think since he's come back into the first team, whether it's through any fault of his own or tactical decisions, he's not looked like the Southampton of last season, I don't think, in terms of his output at least. And even defensively as well, he's not been as good number-wise, but against Watford, it was great. His defensive dual success rate was much improved to his past two performances, and his crossing output was way higher as well. Obviously, because we've decided to go down that right flank more so, and hopefully that's a trajectory that he can keep on, because I think while Cresswell's out, it's going to be really important that we have Southampton performing at a level similar to what Cresswell was at the start of the season, because we need to have an outlet on one side of our defence, and clearly the left side is not a side that we should be looking to play out of with Diop and Masuaki or Johnson going forward, which again I thought he actually provided a nice balance to the defence as well, and kind of forces us to play down the right because you've not got a left-footed player on the left. But if that's what it takes to get the best out of our attack, then so be it.
That did feel to me like it was Southampton's probably his best performance of the season.
Yes,
Arguably Souček's return to it, and we've discussed Souček ourselves and the balance in midfield. But I said to friends, they were talking about bets before the game, and I said, well, Souček in the Europa League when he's played with Noble has sat, and I guess any evidence that Lanzini had a difference on a very, very basic level is the fact that Souček didn't have to sit, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's also the Watford being awful argument to add to that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't set up to do that just because Watford are awful. I mean, you set up to do that because Lanzini is there to assist, don't you? And Souček going. I mean, we have one of the best goal-scoring defensive midfielders in the world. Yeah. Why would you not release him to go and attack the box? I mean, there are a few defensive midfielders who spot the space that opens up for his goal and steam into it. And I'm going to be kind and think he means it. Clearly shaped to shoot to the far corner and then shoot straight down the middle of the goal. So for me, it's a great run and a great finish. And him making those runs is just so helpful to everyone else, the regularity of them. The amount of space it creates for Bowen when he does it. Mm-hmm. Okay, Souček's hitting the box. Suddenly everyone shrinks and goes narrower. Then Bowen's got all this space to attack. Same on the other side. Souček's hitting the box. Oh, now there's a crossing option for from the left flank. It just works so well with him getting forward that often. And the more often he gets forward, the more chances he's going to get, and the amount he converts just on a pure percentages and numbers basis, it just equals goals. So why we wouldn't do it, I'm not entirely sure.
And other positive note, and it's rare that we do this, so I should bring him up. In terms of sub performances from the bench, I believe Masuaku's done everything you'd ever ask for a substitute. He came on full of vigor, full of energy, quite defensively aware as well, Jack. I mean,
yeah. So look, but I've talked about this on my Twitter. Between the 65th minute and the 83rd minute was probably some of the worst football I've seen us play all season. We were truly awful. Like nothing about the way we were playing. I mean, we were brilliant up until that point, but from minute 65 to minute 83, we were shocking. I mean, Southampton had 25% pass completion rate. What did I say? Noble had 50 or 55% pass completion rate. I think Souček only had about 60. No one could pass the ball. We weren't causing them any problems. We were causing ourselves a lot of problems. Dawson was having an absolute nightmare. And it was starting to look a little bit concerning. I mean, Watford were getting a lot of control. They weren't creating a huge amount because they do lack quality. But if you allow a team that much license to get forward and let the fans get back on side, then you put yourself in a really, really dangerous situation with 10 minutes to go with a 2-goal lead. And bringing Masuaku on, he got a lot of flack for it, Moyes, but it was a perfect substitutes performance. He came on with a clearly instructed to get higher and to intercept things and to press higher and to disrupt Watford, because as we were doing in the first half, when you disrupt Watford, not only do you win all of those high turnovers, but you also start getting them to just pass the ball off the pitch out of fear, and that's what happened. He came onto the pitch, won a couple of high turnovers. All of Watford's play that they were previously stringing together fell apart. They started turning the ball over with ridiculous regularity, and then we created 2 chances, in the final 10 minutes that arguably, but we should have scored both. Antonio should have scored. Again, it's Bowen, fantastic work on both of them. Antonio should score, and then Vlasic does score, and then I'm not sure what happens in the 95th moment, but I think direct your questions to Craig Dawson, because it's truly impressive to somehow manage to go through the last 10 minutes of a game and lose the ball as the last man 3 times.
I suppose the problem is when you're focusing on Diop's errors, is you're forgetting that Dawson's actually quite full of errors himself. I mean, he was a good example of the kind of defender who will make sure they wipe a man out. Is when he went up for those headers, and we were discussing it, and the way he smashes a man with a forearm. He's not doing it on purpose. He just jumps, but he's one of those defenders I will go through and I will wipe everything out with it. Diop would do that timidly. I mean, the part that I said that you wouldn't want to be against him because he smiles afterwards and he picks you up like, that must have hurt. Yeah, indeed, you had me in the head. I think you mentioned that Benrahma, you call that dip. Benrahma, once the game was done, he was pretty much done. I would say Cal, there are other positives. The other 2 substitutes, Crowell came on with lots of energy and looked very disruptive, if not else in his cameo. And Vlasic's goal hopefully should do a lot for him.
Yeah, I hope so. It's nice to see him on the score sheet. I think the goal may paper over some stuff that wasn't perhaps so great. I think it's easy. I don't think his cameo was his best performance I've seen. Basically, he gave the ball away a couple of times, made a few silly decisions. But yeah, I mean, if he's coming on and contributing, you can't really ask for that much more than the sub.
It's a perfect time to get a goal for him. It's just I mean, Benrahma's about to go away. He desperately needed something from these few games. Getting a goal now is exactly when we need to get one.
100%.
Really kind of end of Christmas. It was the gift he very much needed.
And his celebration was nice.
It was fab as well.
And
I saw the whole team came up to celebrate with him.
Yeah, exactly, which is really good to see. Because I was not worrying. I mean, as you ever would worry about a player who's perhaps come with such a price tag and expectations and isn't getting in the team perhaps as much as he liked. But I saw a statement that he made, I think, in post-match interviews, perhaps, where he came out and said that his family had been asking about his happiness at West Ham because he hadn't been playing, and he was like, "No, I'm happy here. I get on really well with the team. Blah blah blah. I have to work hard, and I enjoy that, and the manager trusts me," kind of thing. So that was reassuring to see. He's clearly a grafter, and he shows that in his performances. I think, as we've said, he's active all the time, and like you say, getting that goal hopefully will now, we'll see some better performances, because I think against Southampton, where he took that shot, which basically consigned him to being hooked off and on the bench for the next game, was perhaps him trying to force that first goal, because he knew that there was expectation that he needed to do something soon, because it had been X amount of time and he'd not done much or not scored, and he's making bad decisions. Whereas now he's got that, hopefully he'll approach situations with a more sort of level-headed and clear thinking, which would be good, and it'd be great to see more of him.
Lloyd Kelly has been linked recently. Now, interesting one. Bournemouth right in the midst of a Scotty Parker playoff push. Oh, not even playoff push, promotion push. Sorry, but a good defender.
I'm on board with this one. I think a lot of people on Twitter, it's a name that gets bandied about quite often when you talk about left-sided centre backs. I think Obviously, he's going to come up because everybody loves an English player in England. He's young, so everybody loves a young player. So it's almost the perfect match before you even start to dive into sort of why he'd be a good fit for West Ham. But yeah, once I started seeing the links come up, I did a bit of research and tried to get my own evaluation on whether he would be a good arrival. And from what I've seen, both numbers and video, he does look really good. One thing that really stood out, as always with the centre back in a West Ham team, is his aerial due percentage, which I thought was quite surprising given he's only 5'10". But he's averaging 4.75 aerial duels per 90 and winning 75% of them, which is really impressive, especially like I say when you consider his height. And then that led me to think, okay, well, why, if he's so small, is he managing to win these headers? And it kind of links into Diop's shortcomings, is that Kelly reads the game really well. His concentration is brilliant, and the way he manages to beat strikers that are much taller than him to aerial duels is that his timing of when to leave the defensive line and attack the ball is absolutely spot on every time. Whereas even in the last two games, we've seen that Diop's timing to leave the defensive line and attack the ball is absolutely way off every time. So in terms of, we're looking for someone to come in on the left side of the defense and replace Diop and also Ogbonna in the long run, he seems to be a perfect fit, because for all of Diop's failings, Kelly seems to beat them defensively. And then the flip side of that is his attacking output as well, because we've complained on numerous episodes of this podcast about our lack of build-up from the back in recent games without Cresswell and Ogbonna. And also in this episode, my emphasis on how we should be inviting the right side of our attack into the game more and making sure we're getting the best out of Bowen. And that comes into Kelly's long passing ability and his tendency to either hit the ball in between the two centre-backs from deep, or switch across to the right flank to runners in behind. I think in games against Sheffield United and Middlesbrough, Huddersfield, sorry. This has happened twice where he's landed the ball perfectly in between the two centre-backs and the striker's taken it in his stride and they've won a penalty both times. That sort of play is not something that we have in the squad at the minute, but it's something that we would really, really benefit from having with the way we like to play. And particularly, I'm sure we've mentioned it before, Bowen is constantly making runs in behind, constantly, and is so often not found because we just don't have a player that can, bar Rice, who can get his head up and make that pass. But usually Bowen's already made his run before someone's been able to give it to Rice to then make that pass, and then he has to just recycle possession elsewhere. Whereas if we bring in a centre-back who can get his head up under pressure as well, a lot of these passes are being made under pressure, get his head up, see Bowen's running across, hit him, boom, we're in behind, and that opens up a whole new level of attack, which I think would be really, really important for us. So yeah, for me, really would be a good signing. But as you've rightly mentioned at the start of this piece, Bournemouth I can't imagine a world in which Bournemouth would sell in January at least, because I think they might be top at the minute, or at least in the top three, and look like they've got a really strong chance of going up. So to sell one of their best players would just be ludicrous, really.
And the other fear, which will come into all West Ham's minds, a couple of hamstring issues. So
yeah,
West Ham injuries. It's certainly in the old days. Those things don't stay away once you come to West Ham.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, I'm really positive, and it's a good link and one that would, I think, with the youth and the ability possibly to play in as fill in as a defensive left back as well. It's just it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it ticks all the boxes, doesn't it? Moyes has clearly shown that he likes to recruit from the Championship. Lloyd Kelly's proven himself as one of the best centre-backs in the league at that level. And Moyes also likes players that can play in more than one position. And Kelly's proven that he can play as a defensive left-back and a left-sided centre-back. So it kind of does seem to be the perfect centre-back for Moyes to bring in.
Well, we were talking about Nathan Ake, weren't we, a couple of weeks ago? And this is like the obvious budget Nathan Ake option. So
yeah, the good old seal of approval, and that's what you need. Well, and on that note, I think we should set off. Our thanks going into the new year for 2022, even for those who have listened so far, those who will listen onwards, all the best to you, especially to the likes of our YouTube commenters. I made a joke earlier, but I was very much kidding. We are very thankful for anyone who listens, people on the forum, Rio bigging us up on Ease Up Mother Brown. Thank you very much. Our best wishes to everyone into the next year. But until we brave Auld Lang Syne, ta-ta, I guess.
Right, so we're here in the offices of a Late Late Show with the host of a Late Late Show, James Corden.
Hi.
Big West Ham fan.
Yes. I'm big Knees Up Mother Brown man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm regularly on the general discussion page. There's always someone who's got some information, so I love it. Yeah. It's great. Yes, it's excitement surrounded by imminent disappointment. That's what it mostly is.
Get on the forum at kumb.com. Come on, you irons.